Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Modern Market, where every day we discuss everything to do with the modern market. That is the crypto market, the NFT market, and the Hyperliquid jelly market. If you're wondering what on earth has been going on, we haven't explained it today. Cannot wait to get into it. We've got the Hyperliquid conversation to have, along with a bunch of reactions from centralized exchange leaders and other notable people on the timeline. We've got GameStop offering $1.3 billion convertible notes to buy Bitcoin, following in the footsteps of Strategy. And the Ghibli meme runs to $25 million as the timeline is taken over by AI generated images. We'll discuss that, what's possible, and showcase some of the interesting stuff that we have been seeing to try to leverage for ourselves. We've also got the latest on price action on crypto and NFTs, some macro conversation as well, plus a general discussion on where things are going. I am joined by Legendary today, my co-host Seat. We're ready to get into it, but just a reminder, friends, that nothing that we say here is financial, or maybe even today legal advice. Just as a reminder, this market is very risky. There's a lot of things that are up in the air and we don't always know for certain. We're kind of live reporting sometimes, so just bear that in mind. Do your own research and proceed with caution and exercise your own judgment. With that out of the way, Legendary, it is Thursday. It is the 27th of March. Pretty eventful day yesterday. How are you doing? How are you feeling?
GM, pretty eventful day yesterday indeed. And also today's an eventful day for me. I told you that potentially this could be the last day in the modern market for me as a co-host, because after the show, I will pick up my stack of 20 new supplements and compounds that the AI agent has picked for me, and I will start the self-experimentation. So let's see how that goes. I mean, I do have some confidence because I did show that stack to my mom, who's done medical research her entire life. She's a scientist, and she basically wasn't like, the most enthusiastic but about my idea, but she was like, it's safe to do that, but it's a lot. So let's see how it goes, and let's see what I will be able to report on that.
Yes, that will be interesting to see. One suggestion perhaps could be, maybe if the AI has been created or suggested all of these different supplements individually, why not just ask it? Ask it if it's okay. What does it said? Is it okay to take these 20 all at the same time? Maybe that's a reasonable question.
Yeah, like it even said like when to take which of the individual compounds, and like both daytime, and also which one should be taken together, which one should be spaced out over the day. So it did that as part of.
You should ask it, like, on a day when Hyperliquid is tanking and I'm over leveraged in my own position, which of these supplements would suit me best? Can you ask it that question?
I probably can. Yeah, depends on how bad it actually is in the HLP vault, what it will then recommend to you.
Like it. So obviously we're going to get into the HLP stuff in just a little bit. Let's get into the headlines and the price action to get you up to speed with what is going on. Then we'll get into the bigger conversation today. Starting with the price action, as usual, we've got Bitcoin starting pretty steady, just down 1% to 87K. We've got ETH down a couple of percent to 2K. We've got XRP down 4% to $2.36. We've got Solana down almost 5% to $138. BNB is flat at $636. Getting into the meme coin side of things, we have Doge down almost 4% to 19 cents. We've got Pepe down 6% as well. Trump's down 4%. Bonk's down 10. Remember, a lot of this stuff was green yesterday, so it feels like a bit of a pullback across the board. Fartcoin is down 8%. SPX is down 7. WIF's down 7. Pengu's down 7. Also, just trying to see if there's any AI related. With Mog is down 11%. AI16Z is down 15. Peanut is down 8. Okay, seems like a general trend here on the meme coin side of things, although most of this is still green on the week because there was a bit of a bounce in general. Getting into the headlines themselves, number one, Bitcoin holding steady around 87K on the United States announcement of 25% tariffs on all cars that are not made in the USA. We'll touch on that briefly in a bit. Keeping on top of the macro stuff, I think is kind of important. Got Hyperliquid down in the more crypto side of things. Biggest news yesterday for sure. Hyperliquid being down 10% after traders self-liquidate as part of an attack on the HLP. Many centralized exchange leaders spoke out against the Hyperliquid centralized decision to settle the jelly short order much lower than the market price. What does that all mean? We will dive into that in more detail a bit later if that is confusing. We've got GameStop in another headline to offer $1.3 billion convertible note to buy Bitcoin, following in the strategy footsteps. And we had Ghibli meme running to $25 million, pulled back to $17 million now as the timeline is taken over by these Ghibli AI-generated images. Pretty interesting, fun to see. I want to talk a little bit about what we're finding cool there later in the show and what's possible, and then also some consequences. I had an interesting conversation with someone, a big collector, kind of drawing some interesting conclusions there. But those are the headlines. Legendary. Is there anything going on the NFT side that we need to know about?
Yeah, absolutely. There is one collection to pick up, but before I do that, just quickly, the majors have corrected down a bit. They are still looking good. I'm only going to reference Bored Apes. They're still above 14 ETH. They went to size 14.5 yesterday, but they are down a couple percent at 14.15 ETH. Good Vibes Club is continuing its recovery quite strongly. It's up another 30%, back to a 0.4 ETH floor almost. But the thing I want to pick out actually is the Kaito Genesis collection, which is up 20% on the day. It's back at a 2.6 ETH floor. And that is on the back of the news that it won't be a box much longer. It will be converted to an actual PFP, which is quite fun because I remember when I had mine, I was jokingly saying, should I PFP it when it was getting close to 10 ETH? And now it will actually become PFPable, which I think it's pretty fun.
That is pretty fun. That is pretty cool. Interesting to note. The Kaito, well, I'll get into it in a second. There's more news out of Kaito as well today, which I will share just a moment. Getting into the rest of the Web3 Roundup to get up to speed with everything else happening. French tech consulting firm, the Blockchain Group, buys 580 Bitcoin in its largest Bitcoin purchase to date. Seems like maybe, I don't know if you'd call it a stampede yet, but there seems to be more companies deciding to move towards a Bitcoin, or at least a proportion into Bitcoin. We had Wyoming announcing its plan to issue a stablecoin by July this year. That was pretty interesting. Fidelity announced their own plans for a stablecoin too. CZ launched a site, reachme.io, where you can pay to DM CZ. The rate set currently at $120, which I think is kind of a reasonable rate, all things considered. Getting into just a couple of other bits of news. Kaito Yapper payouts announced where $5,000 in staked Kaito will be split amongst the top 50 Yappers and the top 50 emerging Yappers every week. Nice little incentive there. I wonder if that's big enough to get people to be super incentivized, but obviously trying to get the economy moving. And then finally, big piece of news on the outside. Ripcash sells out 64 on-chain editions of pattern recognition for 2.22 ETH each, which is quite a lot. So that was 144 ETH. Was it 144? I think I put that in the tweet. About 140 ETH rates for one of one. Well, there was 64 editions, each piece being a unique piece. So real strong demand for the top digital art still. And I think my thesis there is going to get even stronger when it comes to seeing all of these AI generated images everywhere. Provenance will, I think, increasingly matter. So that's the Web3 Roundup to get you up to speed. Legendary, is there anything catching your attention there before we get into the main stuff today?
I have a couple of thoughts on how AI and art will evolve, but we'll keep that for later since we do have a headline specifically to touch on that. Again, stablecoin news, as always, very interesting to me to see coming from Fidelity, given that they're such a large asset manager. However, the thing that I want to talk a bit more about is the Kaito news. There's quite a few things happening there. You have the PFP stuff, you have this payouts, which you said as part of the snapshot. Also, it was, I think, last week that Yuhu, the founder, bought the Kaito token to the extent of 1.4 mil with his own money, decided to lock that up and have the contingency of hitting a certain revenue from the Kaito business model, or 2 revenue goals, which are the only conditions where that stake is unlocking again. So it's very interesting to see, to have the self-conviction of, putting a quite significant amount of your own money. I don't know Yuhu's total net worth, but that's assume that 1.4 M is not nothing to him, into this protocol, and not having a time lock, but like really having this revenue-based goal tied to that, which is kind of in line with some of the things that we've been speaking about on the show when we said that VCs now are looking more at revenue models, liquid funds, family offices coming into the space, investors looking into Web3 gaming. So much more is now like centered around the revenue model, which is a very, very healthy development in my opinion. And also quick shout out to English in the YouTube comments saying 4 hours until wizard auction. I think it's the last 90 remaining wizards that will be auctioned. He says, don't fade pumping my bags, guys. So here you go. Here's the shout out for the Taproot Wizards mint, which we'll definitely also be reporting on tomorrow.
Well, where do you think, do you have any thoughts on that, Ledge? So I think they sold out between 0.1 Bitcoin and 0.2. Now I think the auction is going to start at 0.4 and then it's going to go down. So it's like a reverse auction in that respect. Do you think it just sells out at 0.4? There's not many left, right? Like 95% of them are sold. So there's only a small percentage left.
Because there's just 80 of them left, not 90, as I said, English corrected me. And the auction starts 0.42. I think there's enough people with having a strong enough incentive and enough Bitcoin to want to see that sell out at 0.42 to have a very good indicator to establish a higher floor from the get-go. So I wouldn't be surprised to see it sell out pretty quickly.
Okay. Then where does it go from 0.4? Like if we're thinking it's going to sell out, English, you're in the comments. Where do you think it goes then? If people want it to sell out at 0.42, what's the ceiling on it? Where's it going to go straight after? Up to 0.6, 0.7, 0.8? Like, there seems to definitely be sufficient demand to like buy this stuff on primary. Is there sufficient demand to be buying more of them? Like, who's the marginal buyer? That's the kind of question I'm always wondering. Like, who's the marginal buyer who wants to buy this from the people who've bought at 0.3 to 0.4, at 0.5, at 0.6? That would be my question.
Are you a potential buyer at that price level?
No, I'm not. I really like, I mean, I think it would be important for ordinals to have, well, I think it'd be really good for ordinals to have like this really expensive collection. I've always thought that like, you know, how, well, I think the quantum cats were always doing a bit better because, but then you had node monks and what was the other one? What's the crazy one on ordinals? I'm just completely blanking.
The punk, like the OMBs.
No. The Bitcoin puppets, the puppets. So yeah, I think whenever was the node monks or puppets were like the 10K, I thought for the premier collections on ordinals, I think that's too low. I'd probably be buyers of underneath that region. But yeah, I mean, this is obviously like very, very expensive as you're going to 0.5. And in general, just getting a bit more conservative with Bitcoin, I think. What are your thoughts?
Oh, I very much agree with that. English also in the meantime has come back with some of his thoughts on potential floor price. He's saying bull case is 0.6, but I think for floor 0.35 could be 0.35 to 0.4 or 0.4 to 0.45 even. The premium is for minting a rare potentially.
Yeah, fair enough. I think it's a reasonable question. I'm not sure that the question I'm asking, who's the marginal buyer? Maybe people are pretty happy to buy at that price. Can it go significantly higher? I'm not sure, but I think the cult is strong. The cult is strong, that's for sure. I think that's already been demonstrated in what they have, how they've been kind of building stuff out and the purchasing demand. Okay, moving away from that mint, which is later, wanted to also touch on, what was the other thing I want to talk about? I think it was just a little bit of macro here. Like, we're going to get into the Hyperliquid stuff for everyone who wants to know what's going on there. We've got like a detailed section on that coming up. We've got the GameStop news where they're going into Bitcoin and the Ghibli stuff, which I think is worth mentioning, not just from a price perspective on the meme coin, but from a more general outlook of how are we going to start leveraging this tech to be useful and to remain useful as humans. But I thought it was interesting that yesterday, I'm going to share. Actually, I'm not going to share the screen, but yeah, the Trump announced 25% tariffs on car imports to the US. And so this was just like a quick bit of news. Obviously, the market has been concerned about tariffs over and over and over again for a long period of time. And at least in part, that's what the price action is reacting to a lot. Every time you hear uncertainty about it, or that we're going to put tariffs on whether it's enemies or whether it's our allies, I think the market's responded pretty poorly. But I guess what I've noticed more recently is that in all of the announcements, even though there might be similar in tone, the reaction by the market has been more and more muted the more times it happens. So either, I guess, all of this kind of rhetoric is being priced in, or the market is just not that concerned with it, or they don't believe that it's going to go through anymore. And well, I think all of those things are kind of happening at the same time. So it's being priced in, not that concerned about it anymore, given where the price has already gone to, or they think maybe he's not even going to go through with it. I think those are all of the possibilities. So this one specifically, what they said was Trump said he announced a new import tax of 25% on cars and car parts coming into the US. Said the latest tariffs would come into effect on April the 2nd, so that's next week, with charges on businesses importing vehicles starting the next day. Taxes on parts are set to start in May or later, so that's actually much later. In their opinion, they said the measure would lead to tremendous growth for the industry, promising it would spur jobs and investment in the US because you don't have to pay that stuff if you then relocate to the US. But analysts have said the move is likely to lead to the temporary shutdown of significant car production in the US, increased prices, and strained relations with allies. The latest move threatens to upend global car trade and supply chains, according to the BBC article. The value of this is reportedly, well, the US imported 8 million cars last year, accounting for about $240 billion worth of trade and roughly half of overall sales. So, interestingly, Mexico is the top supplier of cars to the US, followed by South Korea, Japan, Canada, and Germany. So, arguably, it's, their intention is to obviously raise a lot of money here. But my perspective is more thinking about how is the market reacting to what I guess it's known about for quite a long time. And my thought here, Legendary, is I think the market's kind of done with this news now. Yes, we could still struggle, and yes, there could be consequences from actually going through with it. So in terms of the stocks, I think General
I
Motors
have
split.
some data on the stocks.
Okay.
If I quickly take over,
Yeah,
GM
go.
did react to that, but not as strongly. They only lost 3%. Ford lost 2%. Mercedes lost more. Mercedes was down 4% on the news. The other German manufacturers, BMW, Volkswagen, down anywhere between 2 and 3%. However, one of the stocks that actually reacted the strongest, which was interesting to see, was Tesla. Despite Tesla having that claim of being 100% manufactured in the States, Tesla was down 0.6%, 5.6% over the last 24 hours after having had quite a nice rally last week where it was up a total of 20%. And the interesting thing to see was in the Twitter timeline that on the chart where you saw the different car manufacturers and how much of that is being manufactured in the US. And again, Tesla was there on top with 100%. Elon was also commenting on that, saying, no, the tariffs will affect us as well because there's like some small electronical parts which they are importing and which will be slapped with tariffs. So it was interesting that Elon kind of came in and tried to like paint himself as sort of the victim in this story who's also affected, is not like enjoying a better status because he's, well, very close to this administration, but the tariffs will also make him a loser, not a winner of this. And it's also interesting to see that the stock market did seem to share the same perspective. Although with all that being said, Tesla on the pre-market, will open in a bit, is already up 1%. So let's see if it basically will continue to have the run up or if it stays a bit muted as a result of the tariffs.
Yeah, good additional numbers. What are you thinking? Like, my thought though, as it relates to crypto at least, is like Bitcoin's down 1%. Like, it feels like crypto specifically is completely unaffected by this latest piece of news. I think people think that crypto will move first and fastest when it comes to risk. So when people start to get worried, crypto is the thing that will get sold off hardest and fastest. I think that's probably happened here already. It feels like this range is it feels like this range for at least Bitcoin pretty solid, at least at the moment. It doesn't seem to want to react any worse to announcements that are starting to implement the tariffs, or at least one of the tariffs, amongst many others potentially. Any thoughts here, Ledge, on that?
Yeah, I think the key shift is tariffs went from being an unknown because the first tariff announcement was surprising to a known unknown. Now we know that Trump is playing around with tariffs. It's something we can expect. We don't know who and what is being tariffed with whatever percentage, but it's still a known unknown, and that's less uncertainty, hence less volatility in the market.
Agree. I think that is what's happening, and I think that's part of the reason why I have been in the last week or two. I said, I think it was last week or maybe even the week before, some of these prices are better than what they were a while ago. Like if you like something and it's 50% down or 35% down, it's a better time to buy it than it is to sell it, right? So I had a nibble at Bitcoin a little bit ago, not here. Well, I think I did have one around at this point. Then I had another one when it went lower, and I did the same with Hype when it was, I don't know, 12 or 13. I did the same with Hype again yesterday, actually, on that kind of big liquidation candle. But maybe that's a nice way to get into Hype now. I think that this is a very complicated topic. There's all kinds of things happening at the same time. So what we'll do, Ledge, we're going to pass over to you. There's obviously big news happening out of Hyperliquid yesterday with this attack. Why don't you set it up and tell us everything that happened, and then we'll take it from there. Consider what the most important questions we need to answer is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yesterday, Hyperliquid was at risk to get fully liquidated up to the entire $230 million that were in the HLP vault. So I'll try to break down what happened, and then we'll go into some of the commentary on the timeline. There was a trader who opened a massive short position on the Jelly token, which is one of the meme coins we already had talked about. It did see a very solid run when it was still this season, but faded into being irrelevant. However, he opened a short position, couple million, more relevant, up to 40% of the token supply on the futures platform. And then what the trader did in his next step is basically he got himself liquidated. And in the case of Hyperliquid, what then happens is that Hyperliquid's liquidity pool, the HLP pool, is taking over that position. That is basically the liquidity provider, which you have used, which I have used, which many people have used to deposit some USDC into it. And suddenly, this pool now has a massive short for the Jelly token. And the next thing that then happened is that basically that trader allegedly tried to then pump the price of that Jelly token massively, and to get it to and he got it up like to a 3 or 4x even of what it traded before. And the goal there was to pump it so much that Hyperliquid, who now had to take on the short position, would have been liquidated on the short. And again, if they were liquidated and the token would have pumped so much, they would have risked almost the entire liquidity that was in the pool, which people realized pretty quickly. So the community, or not the community, some of the depositors started to remove liquidity from the HL pool already, which then again also had an impact on the liquidation price. And what then happened is that as this basically short squeezing action trying to liquidate Hyperliquid was going on, Hyperliquid's validator set intervened pretty quickly, and they voted to delist the Jelly.
Just one thing before that, Legendary. Wasn't there something about the centralized exchanges listing the token in a way that was almost encouraging positive price action, right? So the goal here seemed to be
Yes.
to pump the price to get the Hyperliquid vault liquidated. And just before this intervention that you were just about to say, the certain centralized exchanges listed. What exactly do they list? I'm not 100% sure.
There were both like listings as well as rumors that it will get listed on Binance or on other exchanges as well. So this narrative was also basically evolving at the same time, which kind of would have been bullish for obviously the Jelly spot price, and then as a result of that, negative for the short position that Hyperliquid had on. So Hyperliquid had to react pretty quickly, and the validators did so, delisted the Jelly futures from the platform as a result of this suspicious trading activity. Hyperliquid has also made a statement on that where they confirmed exactly that. And what they also did is they forced the settlement of this Jelly position at $0.0095, which was trading, and that was like one of the criticisms or reactions to that, massively under the market value, just to avoid being fully liquidated in the pool. And as a result of that, basically, we've seen two things happening. One is that the Hyperliquid vault, and you can see a dent in there, once where it was unfolding, was down 12 mil at some point, but has fully recovered from that. But also the Hyperliquid price clearly was impacted as a result of that as well. It is still down almost 12% over the last 24 hours. So just to sum it up, trader had a massive short, got liquidated to push the short to Hyperliquid. Then there was a coordinated action going on to try to pump the price and get Hyperliquid liquidated and basically risk the entirety of the funds, the 200 something mil that were deposited at that time.
Excellent summary. As you said, pretty complicated stuff. And there've been interesting and important reactions coming out of this. I think Hyperliquid has been, its risk management and reputation, there's like, I guess, a question mark against that, in the sense that it needs to have, I think, it needs to have things in place to mitigate for these types of things. And I think that's the first question. And then there's also a whole host of questions going on about the centralized exchanges' roles in this. We saw multiple centralized exchange CEOs coming out yesterday, kind of in a relatively coordinated fashion, talking about Hyperliquid in a very derogatory way, very negatively. I think we had the OKX CEO do that, saw the BitGet CEO do that, possibly others too. And this is how, if you had to steelman the other side, because I think there's a lot, there are two sides to this. I think on the one side, you have maybe a lot of crypto Twitter potentially, and you have people who maybe are Hyperliquid fans. Maybe Hyperliquid's made them a lot of money, and they're saying, look, centralized exchanges are worse. Hyperliquid is not perfect, but we like want to support Hyperliquid as an alternative to centralized exchanges. On the other side, you've got the centralized exchanges whose position I think can probably be best summarized with this tweet that was in a thread with conversation with ZachXBT and the founder of DeFi Llama, where it seems to be the case that Hyperliquid, basically, this is the position that the other side would take. Hyperliquid want the perks of decentralization, which means something like no oversight, no accountability. But in the end, they made a centralized move when it suited them. What was that centralized move specifically? It was the move to settle the short at a price which was not the market price. If they had done it at the proper market price, they would have lost loads and loads of money. They, in a centralized way, decided they were going to settle it at a non-market price. In the end, that loss moved over to the trader, right? It went back to the trader.
With an important caveat, yes, centralized decision to settle under the market, but in an official statement, Hyperliquid also did say that they've basically flagged the addresses who lost money as a result of that, and those addresses will be made whole from the Hyper Foundation. So yes, they did settle to contain the damage, and yes, there's obviously losses that people incurred as a result of that. It's still a centralized move that does not change the fact of that, but those people, I think it's important to add for context, will be paid out from the Hyper Foundation.
Okay. That is helpful context, but I think it's worth going through these like different, because there was a few interesting takes in this thread of like how people were reacting to it. The founder of DeFi Llama said, in my opinion, the explanation for why the centralized exchanges helped Bybit when Bybit obviously got hacked not so long ago for more than $1 billion, but ganged up on Hyperliquid is simpler. After the FTX failure, the whole of crypto market went down and confidence in crypto tanked. So they want to avoid a repeat of that systemic risk, and they see the Hyperliquid HLP as an isolated risk. So if people are wondering, well, why would you help Bybit when they got completely wrecked the other day, when they were hacked for more than $1 billion? And why would you go after Hyperliquid? Well, I think the numbers are different. Like one is significantly bigger. One would maybe have more lasting implications for the industry. Whereas I guess they're thinking, this is his position anyway, their thinking is this is a more isolated thing. I think I maybe lean towards the Zach take though, which was just underneath, where he said previously centralized exchange teams faced billion-dollar fines and even jail time by regulators for weak compliance early on. Hyperliquid has recently seen the same illicit flows, has said they are decentralized, so cannot do anything. Now, Hyperliquid made a centralized decision with few validators that control the majority of the stake to quickly close the position at an arbitrary price for an entity using the protocol as intended. So I think that's part of the point. So probably feel a bit wrong seeing the attention on crypto Twitter brought to them while making centralized decisions like you did without the same consequences. I think that's what is at its core. And someone said in the comments before they'd be interested in my legal take on it. I'm definitely not giving a legal take here just because I was a lawyer at one point in time in the past. But I think if you're thinking about it from a business perspective, it becomes hard to look. Money laundering is a thing that people are not allowed to permit. And if you are a centralized exchange, I suspect you have all kinds of regulations which say you need to do X, Y, and Z in order to make sure that these funds are not going through your wallet. And if they are identified, you're going to have a whole host of things that you need to do. So I'm sure, look, money laundering happens everywhere, to be clear. Money laundering happens in your favorite banks on the high street or, everywhere. But when it does happen, then there's a bunch of things that you are compelled to do in order to mitigate it and to make sure the right thing is done, whatever that might be. And I think the position here is, if you want to be able to say that you can't do something when, some other illicit funds are going through your protocol because you're decentralized and because you're decentralized, you can't comply with certain regulations in the way, or you don't have to comply, then you can't necessarily use that as a get out clause when something goes wrong. And then say, well, actually, we do have the power to take further action here because we can, get our validators together and kind of make a quicker decision. So that's the alternative perspective, which I think will actually have merit for the people who are regulating. I don't know the specific legal ways that Hyperliquid are presenting themselves. I'd need to look, all legal things you need to look at in like significant detail to get on top of precisely how people are presenting themselves, exactly what regulations they need to be complying with. Is not possible to say that unequivocally on a show after reading up on it over the night. But that would be the position of why they are maybe coming under criticism and why it might not be super straightforward for them moving forward. Legendary, going to stop there. What are your thoughts based on the conversation so far?
I honestly agree very much with ZachXBT, who pointed out a couple more details in the comments. And one of his posts, one of his replies sums that up perfectly. He says he dislikes it when teams LARP is decentralized, saying they cannot help victims, but make centralized decisions when it suits them. And also on the liquidation of the Jelly, or on the settle price of the Jelly token, It was an arbitrary price because people said it was not an arbitrary price. The last Oracle traded at 50 cents and it was settled at $0.095, so way below the Oracle price. And the point that Zach is basically making is exactly that he wished Hyperliquid was more consistent. Like someone said, decentralization is a spectrum, and Hyperliquid should basically pick a spot within that spectrum and stick with it. And also on that narrative of coordinated attacks, this is me basing on what Zach has said. I did not do the research on all the individual posts myself. He said that all the centralized exchanges would then start to comment on that, did that after the fact. So while this was still an ongoing situation, none of the centralized exchanges, that is again what ZachXBT is saying. And I mean, I can pull it on screen here. And confirming with some screenshots that they clearly made the posts after this decision to delist and settle at that arbitrary price. So if I put myself like in the shoes of Binance and other exchanges and think like, CZ has been to jail, there's been like massive pressure and fines on that. I can understand that why it might feel to them that Hyperliquid is trying to cherry pick and be decentralized, don't have that regulatory oversight, and why you would not step in, because A, all of those reasons, and then B, it's too small of an amount to do so. And I thought about that from the perspective of the show, right? So say something happens to Captain and Steve, who is hosting right after our show. They're like very close to us. They would be like basically they would be our peers. So if something would happen to them and we can step in to help them, I would do that. But if something happens to the BBC, I'm like, man, I don't really give a fuck about that.
Interesting. I think I kind of agree with both positions. It's not I'm trying to have a stronger take, because it's not that I agree with everyone. It's just that I think everyone was justified to do the things that they do. So, for example, I can confidently say, I think that they're trying to have it both ways. They're trying to be decentralized sometimes, but then not be decentralized sometimes. However, when it comes down to that like decision making thing, when they're seeing that happen, where they're seeing the liquidation, the potential liquidation becoming more and more likely after they've taken on that position, what would I have done as Hyperliquid? I think I would have done the same thing. So I'm not saying that they did the wrong thing as such. I think practically when you're put in that position, and you need to defend your protocol and defend that vault, I think I think it would be justified to do the same thing. And then you have to think about after now. The aftermath is, right, how centralized are we? How decentralized are we? Are we going to be able to navigate these regulations? Like, yeah, have our actions and decisions had any consequences for the way that we frame ourselves and how we should be regulated? And then you just got to figure that out as the next step. But I think it was probably justified for them doing what they did. And you'd probably do that if you were the business person watching that happen. I have a feeling you'd probably want to protect yourself first and then figure it out after. Final thoughts there, Ledge?
I think ultimately Hyperliquid is too small to be decentralized or fully decentralized. And that kind of reminds me of someone who did it very well in the initial communication. And that's not the little nouns, the noun style per se, where when the first nouns were being auctioned off each and every day, they said, look, we are building a DAO, but in the beginning, we're going to keep the core team. We're going to keep a veto right. If something goes wrong, if something would be massively against that, what we want to build, we're going to act in a centralized way to prevent that from happening, unless we're confident enough that we're like big enough and decentralized enough to go fully decentralized. And ultimately, yes, Hyperliquid is a super cool protocol and has hundreds of millions in there, but it clearly shows that because you can have so much leverage in there, that you can destabilize or put that system at risk with a rather low 7-figure amount. Like, I know a couple mil is a lot. We've seen that with the other whale trader as well. But ultimately, a lot of people have a couple millions available to do whale games, which then to me says it's just too small of a platform yet to be fully decentralized. And if that were the stance, that we're like, look, we aim to be decentralized in the future, but as we are growing, there might be situations where we need to intervene in a very centralized fashion to protect ourselves. If that were like a more clear communication or stance by Hyperliquid, I think that in future events, because this potentially still can happen again in different ways and forms, and it has happened before in similar ways as well. I think having a clear stance on that would be very helpful.
Correct me if I'm wrong. So I think there's two things moving forward which people can do to, or Hyperliquid can do to mitigate this. One is, I think you're correct. This can't happen every week. And as you say, look, yes, a few $1 million is a lot of money, but in crypto is not that much. A bunch of people would be able to attack you doing this on a routine basis if it was going to continue. So I think there's two things. One, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because you probably understand this stuff better than me. A, you've got to reduce the amount of leverage that you're offering. Maybe that can be a protective measure. But then B, is it viable, do you think, to be offering these perps on these like truly ridiculous tokens like Jelly Jelly? I don't care who launched it. It doesn't matter if they're from a Web2 company that sold that's really valuable. Like that's a joke token, and it's a meme token. It's going to be a really volatile token. I suspect a lot of this is like, I suspect you can't do this with Bitcoin. For example, you can trade spot Bitcoin on Hyperliquid. I'm guessing, or I'm assuming, unless you tell me otherwise, that you can't do this. You can't do this kind of attack on the more solid assets. You can do these kind of attacks on incredibly illiquid meme coins where an individual or a small group of individuals can wildly manipulate the price. So not being able to offer that might be one of the most obvious mitigating options to position themselves and secure themselves better. What do you think?
I mean, reducing the leverage and also the increasing the margin requirements for larger positions is something that had happened after that massive ETH position that also got self-liquidated. In that case, it was a 9-figure position if you include the leverage on it, which kind of shows you can play these games with ETH as well on Hyperliquid, because again, it's still rather small. But I do agree, having different leverage caps and then thinking what you actually want to offer there is a thing. What you can also do is like try to limit the amount of position sizes that you can have, but then again, you can circumvent it by having multiple accounts, etc. I think Kane from Infinix said there is not a real solution to that. That was back when the ETH thingy happened. Like what you can do is just force people to KYC, which is exactly against what you want to build with a decentralized platform. But other than that, you just can make it harder and improve the risk management. But there's no way, in his opinion, to completely prevent something from that happening. From happening. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I mean, my thinking would at least be in the interim, stop listing like really, really volatile tokens. You've got amazing products with spot Bitcoin. You've got an amazing product with Hype. You're offering all this other cool stuff. That feels like an obvious one. But Funky, your hand was raised. Welcome to the stage, my friend. On this Hyperliquid conversation, what would you like to add? I cannot hear you, Funky. If you are speaking, Ledge, can you hear him?
Unfortunately, I cannot.
Oh, Funky, maybe you want to drop down and pop back up. Clearly, something's not working there. But we are probably gonna try and drop down and come back up, and we'll see if we can get you up to hear you again. You back with us? No, he has disappeared. That is a shame. Okay, maybe we'll just keep. Oh, he's back.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah. Yes, we got you. We got you.
So you guys did a fantastic job breaking down this whole situation. I was just going to bring up something I brought up on the show a long time ago, which was the decentralization aspect. As an infra provider, we've tried to run, and it seems, and I saw a great ICO Beast. I don't know if you guys saw it. He had like the Italian comedian thing from the Keck meme where they did like the whole story. It was really funny. And he said, Jeff's got 6 computers in his office. Those are the validators. But, I think it really just kind of, to the point that Legendary was bringing up, the slow decentralization of, like with Nouns DAO, just trying to, that you're running something that is very novel. I think it just strikes to the philosophical part about like how important is decentralization in this industry, because had the decentralization, you would have never been able to coordinate the validator set to do what they did, just full stop. So, and it would have probably crumbled the whole Hyperliquid ecosystem if that had been pulled off the attack. So I just wanted to give you guys kudos. Did a very thorough breakdown, but just to kind of chime in about the decentralization part from the validator perspective.
Yeah, I think that's an important part, right? Because in practice, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to, I think I saw a screenshot where someone had asked, I mean, I don't know if it was real or not, but yeah, in practice, to reach quorum on that, whatever decision they decide to take, you need to go very, very fast. And if you are super decentralized, there's all kinds of factors which would make it hard to come to consensus very quickly, I think. So, okay, that is that. Hope that was a helpful breakdown, because it's kind of complicated. There was a lot of things going on, a lot of different reactions, and that's our take. Hope that was helpful. Let's keep it moving. We've got only 9 minutes left for the show. Legendary, I think it's probably best to go straight into the Ghibli stuff, because that's the most viral, most exciting, most interesting, and fascinating stuff that's been taking over the timeline in the last 24 hours. Do you want to talk about the financial side and also just the AI side and what's possible here?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to quickly bring up the chart for Ghibli, the token. There we go. As you perfectly said, did run up to a bit more than 25 mil, is currently trading at 16 mil. Came seemingly out of nowhere because the timeline was trending. I'm going to get into what that exactly is with, and Kilano did a thread on that, with Ghibli style pictures. Ghibli Studios is a Japanese anime studio, which is very, very famous for this specific style. And as I also showed it yesterday on the show, actually pretty early when I started to play around with that, ChatGPT 4.0 with the new image generating algorithm allows you to create those images, upload any image or Pudgy Penguin PFP, whatever you want to upload to that, and create a Ghibli styled image. And I think the very, very important or like fascinating thing to me to note is, if you look at a typical Studio Ghibli movie, just to get a sense of how much work goes into that. So look at a typical movie. It's 60 to 70,000 hand painted frames, which all are watercolored by hand as well. And there's like one famous movie that has a scene in there where it's basically a very, very packed crowd and everyone's moving around, which typically anime movies try to avoid, because you will have like 2 characters talking, background rather static, which is way more feasible to draw. And this scene alone, 5 seconds, the animator who was working on that, it took him 10 months to paint all of that. So just to get a perspective of how much work goes into that, and contrasting that, someone yesterday spent a total of 9 hours to recreate the Lord of the Rings trailer in Ghibli style based on the real trailer. And again, like you have this one guy who worked for 10 months to get a 5-second scene in a movie, and then something, and you're going to bring that up on screen for us. Like the Lord of the Rings trailer now can be done in a couple hours. It looks actually pretty insane.
Yeah, this is pretty crazy. Let's see if we can play this with the sound and the image. If you're watching in, you'll be able to see this. If you can't, you'll be able to hear it. But Legendary will just give a quick summary after as well.
Changed. And some things that should not have been forgotten were lost. But the Ring of Power has a will of its own.
Evil is stirring in Mordor. The ring has awoken. Sauron needs only this ring to cover all the lands of darkness. What must I do?
The ring must be destroyed.
It's just crazy.
Into the fires of Mount Doom.
I know what hunts you. They're coming.
They will find the ring and kill the one who carries it.
You have my sword.
My bow.
And my axe.
You carry the fate of us all, little one.
This task was appointed to you.
So this, just going to stop it there. So Legendary, this cost a person $250 in credits. But now this is able to be done super fast, or did someone re-edit this a little bit?
So getting into the process, because it's actually pretty cool. What that person did is, first of all, screenshot 102 shots in the trailer, in the in the actual movie trailer, remix that into Ghibli style, which he did in OpenAI's Sora, that is the video editing platform, and then animate that both with Kling AI and Luma Labs, and bring it, I think, then back to Sora to sync it with the trailer. And you can basically see some of the screenshots here from the movie trailer, and then some of the Ghibli style footage that was created with OpenAI. And yeah, basically have the storyboard in Sora, different prompts to get that going. And I think the majority of the work was basically to sync it with the trailer, that it one-to-one looks the same. And again, this process took a total of 9 hours only for a trailer that is 1 minute and 53 seconds, which is insane.
1 day of work. Just 1 day of work. Well, I mean, we've been experimenting with it a little bit. You've been playing with it around a little bit. I saw some interesting takes on the timeline on like what the implications of this are. I'll share my thoughts here. A lot of people say like, okay, your whole, designers are going to be out of a job, artists will be out of a job because you can just do it yourself. I don't think that fully appreciates the skill it takes to the conceptual stuff. I saw Bold, for example, the very beloved comic artist, an NFT artist, but does NFTs, also just does funny comic strips every day. Like, you can't repeat that. Like, if you're someone who thinks you can do that, I'd be skeptical to think that other people can do the thinking and planning required in order to create that humor, unless, and this is, I guess, the big question, unless you can train it on their previous comics or a body of work of previous comics. And not only are you training it on the art style, which is obviously getting good at now, but you can also train it on the humor and tone and apply that to like the latest news. And I think all of those things are not quite possible at the moment. You can't get, well, the art seems to be getting pretty good and you can do that nicely. But even, for example, today I was just checking with Grok, and I checked in with Grok to say like, okay, well, how do you best describe the Hyperliquid situation or something like that? And I don't think it gave me a sufficient answer. And then when you're also aiming for something humor or emotional, where you want to elicit a human emotional response from someone, I think it would be hard to triangulate those three things, like create art which is timely, so it's like it takes into account some things that happened on the day, and it needs to elicit a human emotion. I don't think it can do those three things quickly yet. So that's my first thought. Although, I think for a lot of rudimentary things, say, for example, Legendary, you had an artist to create your background. Sorry, not your background, your, what's it called? The thing above your profile picture, the banner. You had someone to do that. I've got a feeling for something maybe a bit more rudimentary like that, you'd be able to create something very, very similar now with this kind of skill. So the level of artist, or the skills the artist needs to bring, needs to be a bit higher, because it has to lean in to the conceptual stuff. My second thought, which is more interesting for us being in the digital space, is I think this is like just perfect for NFTs again. Like, if you want to value provenance, if you want to value like human creation, and if everyone is able to proliferate your style so easily across the internet, which is exactly what's happening to this specific art style over the last 48 hours, the person who's created that on the blockchain with the provenance, if you're wondering where the value goes, hopefully the thinking is it should go there. And I think this is incredibly bullish for NFTs, for creators. That'd be my final thought. Ledge, what are your thoughts there?
I think the thing I would like to add to that is Ghibli. A lot of people know it, and a lot of people have emulated those images with Midjourney already, but a lot of people had no idea what that was. Like our good friend Sammy posted on the timeline, I had no idea what this was, but now I'm creating Ghibli images, and that got so much more exposure and got millions of views in so many threads that people would have not otherwise known about before that. So maybe this will be a metric in the future. Is your style so unique, so impactful that AI will pick it up millions and millions of times on the one hand, And then that kind of connects me to the idea of story protocol. I know I criticized story protocol for like being too early with that concept, but at some point in the future, that could be the reality of seeing basically the original creator of that art style, of that artwork, whatever it is that AI is drawing the inspiration from, and seeing all the derivatives and all the like financial impact or financial value that has been generated from them, and being then back redistributed to the original artist, creator, whatever. I do think that prompting in itself is already a skill. It also might become an art form. And ultimately, I think to your point on those individual things, like create an image, it evokes a strong emotion that is like timely commentary on what's happening. I feel like individually, different AIs can do that already. Like you can have a deep research going on in an agent to find out like what is happening in the world, pick something that is very, very important, have another AI like draw up a storyboard or a concept around that, and then have ChatGPT trying to come up with a picture that is like strong, powerful, meaningful. I don't think we're still like far away from this being a fully integrated process. But I do think we'll get there faster than people are expecting that to happen. And provenance, as you said, will become an important thing. Last thought on that, because I posted about this on my timeline, and someone had this interesting point. Maybe we'll value art more that has been created in the pre-AI era. And English kind of said something similar in the comments. He said, like, imagine this was out before the Azuki Follow the Rabbit short. Everyone would be like, meh, Azuki, not too impressed with it. So maybe we'll have this like cut pre and post AI creativity or art forms that have been, well, created, produced.
Interesting. Very, very interesting stuff. I think there's definite knock-on effects for people in the creative industry. I think in the end, you gotta leverage this stuff. You gotta play around with it. You gotta get creative with it. Leveling up and playing around with it, I think, is the way to go. Whether you're in the news industry like us and like doing opinions and commentary, or whether you're on the pure, more creative side, figuring out in what ways you can interact with it. I think that's ultimately the way to go, because this stuff is powerful, as we have just seen. So guys, hope that was an interesting conversation today. That is the end of the show. We kind of went on a variety of things there, macro to Hyperliquid to the future of AI, art, and provenance. But just a reminder, we do this every single day, Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern time for 1 hour. We cover everything that is to do with the modern market. That is the crypto, NFTs, or whether that's like being creative and figuring out how to leverage the tech so we can be better and more successful online. Hope you enjoyed the show. Thanks to Ledge, as always, for co-hosting with me. Thank you to Funky for your contributions, as always. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Take care, and we will be back with you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.